Okay, we've had a very successful first session, and now that we've heard the story of Flight 93 and the challenges of the new memorial, our next job is to learn how to listen to what the children are really saying and thinking. And I think this is probably going to be the most difficult part, learning to listen and listen with an open heart and an open mind. And I feel very positive as I see some people shaking their heads that, yes, this is what we're here for. This is what we want to know. And our moderator for this session certainly has the background and the perspective and the experience to lead us to understand how to listen. Dr. Schomburg has gathered a really impressive panel to give us firsthand information and examples, and she will introduce them to you in a minute. Dr. Roberta Schomburg is Associate Dean and Director of the School of Education at Carlow University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Roberta oversees the Graduate Studies program in Early Childhood Education and is Professor of Education. She is a Senior Fellow at the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning and Children's Media at St. Vincent College and has been a consultant with the Fred Rogers Company for the past 29 years. Roberta and Hedda Sharapan have presented at numerous national conferences and have collaborated on a wide variety of publications and professional development materials for teachers. Dr. Schomburg is governing board member and vice president of the National Association of the Education of Young Children, is a member of the Pennsylvania Early Learning Council and board member of the Pennsylvania State Board of Private Academic Schools. She's taught children from 3 to 8 in a variety of early learning settings and public schools. And my question is, do you ever sleep? I can't imagine that you do. We're very honored to have you today. Please welcome Dr. Roberta Schomburg.
Good afternoon. I'm going to have to adjust this a bit. I was doing a presentation at Penn State a number of years ago, and on the evaluations, a number of people said, well, she could have stood during the presentations. I was standing. So I think this is fine. I'd like to introduce the panel members, and I decided to introduce all three at one time here at the beginning so as not to disrupt the flow of the stories. And so let me introduce each one, and then as they present, they'll just each one hand off to the next one. We have first Karen Miller. Karen currently teaches second grade in Shanksville, and she has done so for 25 years, in addition to having taught first, third, and fourth grades as well. She engages in outreach with children in a variety of ways through the United Methodist Church, where she is a member, and she is here this morning to share her stories about her work with children in the days following 9/11 and since then. The second member of our panel is Adam Shaffer. Adam is a ranger of the National Park Service and at the Flight 93 Memorial. He has been connected to the Flight 93 Memorial since 2005 and has been a ranger there since 2006. He's a lieutenant with the Somerset Volunteer Fire Department, and in his role as a member of the Shanksville Volunteer Fire Department, he assisted with the recovery and the investigation of the crash of Flight 93. And our final presenter is Dr. Andrea Laurier from the Caring Place in Pittsburgh. She is program manager at the Caring Place, a center for grieving children, adolescents, and their families. She's been there since 1998. She brings over 20 years of experience in child assessment, research, and clinical interventions for children and families. She'll be helping us reflect on the panel presentations and give us some ideas about the grieving process and how we can support children and families. Before we begin, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. I want to frame these conversations around the meaning of events for children. And I'm actually taking borrowing, if you will, from the theories of Erik Erikson. Now, those of you who, I dare not ask, those of you who are in education and are students of education, I'm sure are quite familiar with Erik Erikson. He was a psychoanalyst and psychologist, developmental psychologist. But what you may not know is how closely connected he is to the Fred Rogers Center. Erik Erikson and Benjamin Spock were here in Pittsburgh. I'm not sure the dates exactly, 50s, 60s, and helped to establish the Child Development Program at the University of Pittsburgh, along with Dr. Margaret McFarland, who was Fred Rogers' advisor and consultant to the program, a psychologist who worked with him over many years. And if I remember correctly, and I don't know if Brother Norman is here to correct me, in 1997, oh, no, I'm sorry, 1979. I have my numbers backwards. There was a forum here, an Erik Erikson forum, and he was here as a speaker, and some of you may remember his being here. So I thought it was fitting to use some of his ideas and his framework to talk about how children understand events and how they represent them in play, in artwork, in stories, and in conversations. So the first thing that Erik Erikson talked about was the common meaning of events and how they're represented. And so I think it's important for us to remember as we work with children, as we talk with children, that we all share the feelings of sadness, grief, anger, and helplessness in times of tragedy. And I think Gordy put it well when he said we sometimes misjudge how much children do understand, and we misjudge the depth of feelings that they may have. We think, oh, they're not paying attention, they don't notice, it really is not affecting them, and yet just as it affects all of us, it does affect children. The other thing, so in terms of the common meaning, I think we have to be sensitive to that as we listen to the stories. Some of the feelings that we have, in addition to sadness and grief, have to do with a feeling of helplessness. We all feel helpless, and that's one of the things that children may also express in their conversations with us. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The next meaning that Erikson talks about is the developmental meaning. And I think this is critical, that we have to understand, yes, they share some of the same feelings with us. Yes, they have the same reactions. Yes, they are paying attention. But it's also important to know that based on their developmental ages, there are going to be different reactions and there are going to be different understandings. As Jeff said, the difference between his 3-year-old and his 9-year-old is very different. Some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we're thinking about young children is, for instance, that what they see on a screen, they may not understand is really not happening immediately. So I think of the images that even a few weeks ago we were seeing over and over of planes crashing into buildings. Many times children think, because of their developmental understandings, that there were 150 planes crashing into buildings. And so keeping that in mind is important. It's almost like when children are looking at screens, it's almost as though they're looking through a window at something that's going on. That's something we need to keep in mind. We also know that their reactions are going to be a little bit different. So for toddlers, the way they communicate, what they're feeling, what they're understanding, may be very motoric. I mean, they might get kind of much more hyperactive. They may not be saying anything yet because they don't have the words. But there is something that happens in their routine that parents who are talking with them, or caregivers in the case of childcare, may begin to notice when something is bothering them. We know also that preschoolers are much more prone to feelings of helplessness and who's going to take care of me. And so in times of difficulty, when something happens, their first concern is, will I be safe? And so when we think about children of 3, 4, and sometimes even 5 visiting the site and seeing some of the images that Jeff described, they are going to want to know, will their parents keep them safe? Can we keep them safe? And one of the messages that we often say to adults is that we have to reassure them that we will keep them safe, even if we ourselves are not sure that we can keep them safe. That's the message they have to hear. When we work with school-agers, one of the things that we notice is that their ability, they have the ability to use knowledge to ward off disasters and their own competence. So they want to know, they have lots of questions because they think if they know, they can control what happens. And so they're full of questions. Again, being aware that this is what the 6 to 12-year-old needs to do in order to feel safe and in order to offset the feelings of helplessness. And then we have to keep in mind the unique or special meanings. And these are really important because they have their own experiences that are individual and that are going to color any event that they experience and how they talk about things with adults around them. So for instance, children whose parents travel a lot or children who have been on an airplane might have very specific concerns that we wouldn't have considered because of their own experiences. Children who have separation issues still with their own families are going to be much more prone to being concerned about what happened to the children. And we know there were no children on board, correct? There were no children on the plane, but they wonder what happened to the children of the people who were there. They also may regress to earlier stages, and so we'll see behavior that we might not have seen before. We often talk about that as regression in service of the ego. It's an important thing to have that time to regress, regroup, and then move forward. We also know that children who've experienced other losses are going to have a much more intense reaction when there's some kind of a traumatic event. It recalls things, it recalls the feelings, it recalls the images, and it recalls the helplessness that children have felt when they have experienced losses in previous times. And we also know that the children we're looking at now who may have been old enough to remember the events are going to, during this period of time when they may be revisiting the site or hearing about it on television, their recollections from earlier years is going to color the event that they're experiencing a second time. And so keeping in mind that many of their earlier experiences may have been very much more sophisticated, the affect that comes from that period may reemerge during the period, even though they're older, they may be 12, they may be 14, and yet if they have any recollection, even from the pre-verbal level, some of that affect and some of that emotion may color their responses as they talk with adults about the event. And so at this point, I'm going to just share with you a couple of examples. And this is a drawing that was done by a group of children in a preschool kindergarten. These children were about 5 years of age. And I think as we look at it, we can see evidence of some of the common meanings that are reflected in this story that these children told and drew. And we'll see some of the developmental issues, and we'll see perhaps some of the unique and special meanings, many of which I don't know because I did not work directly with these children. But let me just show you this. And I think as you look at the story they tell, think about how some of it got very mixed up. And part of the reason it gets very mixed up is because their level of cognitive development. Part of the reason it gets mixed up is that the affect floods them and keeps them from really understanding what happened. And part of the reason that the story gets mixed up is that it's influenced by their own developmental issues that often take precedence over reality, as in all children's imagination. The story, The Scary Town. I'm going to, I think this is, you might be able to read this, but let me just go through quickly the story. In the town of Popperville, there is a bad monster named Cheery. Interesting. A good vampire named Popcorn, a good witch, Poisey, and 2 dragons, Buster and Speedy. They are good dragons. President Norway lives here too, in the White House. Now this was written on the days after 9/11. So you can see there are elements of something at the White House. They have this notion of good and bad and something going on here. It was a dark night, and all of the bad boys and girls in Popperville were running around the streets terrorizing the town. I'm sure they picked up this notion of terrorists. Popcorn the vampire sees these kids, so he runs to stop them. Popcorn decides to suck the blood off the bad children to teach them a lesson. When Popcorn sucks their blood, the children begin to cry. They learned their lesson, and they became good kids. Now, you can see this has no connection to anything except the lens from which they see how these events happen. And in their lives, often what is tied to good and bad is their own behavior. And they sometimes even think that they're the cause of things that happen, whether they were behaving or not. And so it doesn't have anything to do with what really happened, but is a reflection of some of their misunderstandings. At the same time, on the other end of town, Cheery the monster is trying to take over the president. Again, another element of reality, something was happening. He knocks down the wall because he is too big for the door, and he runs after President Norway. The president takes a trophy off of his shelf and throws it at Cheery, but the monster blocks it with one of his wings. Again, very little connection to reality, but the theme of something to do with the president, something falling down. These are elements of the stories. Popcorn slams the door so hard that he wakes up the dragons. He slammed the door so hard that some of the White House fell over. Cheery the monster became sad when all of these people come because all he ever wanted was to have a friend. He wanted to make friends with the president, but everyone there thought he was trying to hurt him. Cheery tells this to everyone. So Popcorn, Buster, Speedy, Poisey, and President Norway tell Cheery that they will be his friends. You can see the push for children to want to have a good resolution here, and the notion that sometimes they themselves, at this age, do things that hurt their friends, and that wasn't their intent. And sometimes children get aggressive when they just want to play. So their own issues are sort of hijacking their understanding of the story. And in the end, these children say they work very hard together, and when they're all done, they sit down and eat chicken wings. The end. I share this example with you because I think it's important for us to understand how confused children's representations of events are, and how important it is for them to have adults as mediators to help them talk through the issues, to help them draw about it, to help them play about it. I will also just share with you briefly a book that Hedda shared with me called September 12th, We Knew Everything Would Be All Right. Are any of you familiar with this book? Yes, good. And I think here again, these children in this book, and I'll have it up here if some of you want to look at it, are older. And so you can see a much more cognitive representation. One of the things they did was actually organize on their calendar when this happened, and then the next day. And they talk about the ordinariness of it, that the sun came up, it was a regular day, and then all sorts of awful things happened, which they have described. But in the end, there's this need for closure. And so one of the things they say is, we knew everything would be all right. And 2 + 2 is 4. 2 + 2 still added up to 4. So again, as we think about the stories we're hearing and our thoughts in working with children, if we can keep in mind that one of the things children really need is a sense of order and routine and a sense of helping, of needing to know and wanting to know from adults that everything will be all right and that life will go on. As they took reassurance from things that they heard from their parents, from their families, and on television. And I love the way this ends. And the next morning, the sun came up, and not the end. And so I was struck, Jeff, when you were giving the end of your presentation, the notion that this is not the end, that things happened after 9/11 and things will continue to go on afterwards. And so if we can help children process this as they reminisce, and if we can be sensitive to hearing their concerns, to hearing their stories, then we can be there and be available to help them. I'll turn it over to Karen at this point.
On September 11th, 2001, I was teaching this second grade class at Shanksville Stony Creek School. The students were 7 to 8 years of age, and my door was open, as it often is, and I heard a commotion in the hallway. It sounded disturbing, so I stepped into the hallway to see what was wrong. Some teachers who had a prep period had heard about the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Some had seen it on TV. After I heard that disturbing news, I re-entered the classroom and closed the door, mostly so the children couldn't hear. But at that point, I knew very little details. The children knew, though, something was happening. And immediately one child asked, "What's going on?" I told them that teachers had heard that some planes had crashed into some government buildings in New York City and in Washington, D.C. The next question came quickly. Was it on purpose? Was it on purpose? I must confess that I fully had not processed that idea until that question was asked. I reasoned out loud, thought out loud as we often do as teachers, and I told that boy, if it had just been one plane, I would think it was an accident. But it was more than one plane and more than one government building. The crashes happened near the same time. So I believe it was done on purpose. That same boy continued questioning, "Will it happen here?" Without hesitation, I said, "We live out in the country. There are no government buildings here. No, it's not going to happen here." And immediately, as soon as I finished that statement, there was a loud crash. The building shook and the windows rattled. I did not believe that the sound we were hearing was a plane crashing. My mind could not imagine that. So again, I was thinking out loud, and I said, that probably was a blown transformer. We had that happen once here. We may lose power and the lights may blink. I really thought that's what happened. And the children did too, because I was their teacher and they believed what I said. Then an aide came to the door, and she beckoned me to come into the hallway. And quietly she told me that that was a plane, and it had crashed here. They had missed their target. Somehow in that moment I thought she was implying we were the target. We were to keep all the children in our rooms and wait for further instructions. And when I went back to the front of the classroom, there were no questions. They had not heard our conversation. And I told them nothing of what I knew. There was no sense worrying them. Word came that we were to go to a lunch. We were to go to lunch just a little early. We eat quite early at our school at 10:35, and so it wasn't very far from then. And parents had been calling the school and were worried about their children. Some of them had heard that the plane had crashed into the school. And as they saw the events of the day unfold on television, they were coming. We were going to try to get everyone fed. And during lunch, I was able to get some more information. I knew enough now to tell them without alarming them. And so when we got back from lunch, I told them, "Remember that loud sound we heard? I really thought it was a transformer, but I now know that it was another plane crash. I want you all to know all of your families are safe and all of your homes are safe." Now, I know I repeated that to them because I wanted to make sure that they weren't worried. And then that same little boy asked, "What about the people on the plane?" I said, "I don't know. I had heard that the plane was carrying a lot of mail. I'm hoping there weren't very many people on it." But he was very persistent, and he said, "But what about the people on that plane? There had to be some people." And I shook my head and I said, "I don't think there were any survivors, but I don't know." Then I talked to the class to prepare them for an early dismissal. I said, "Your parents are worried about all of you. Many of them may come and take you home a little early. And that's why there were so many students in the cafeteria, because we wanted to make sure you had something to eat before you went home. And now we're going to just depart from our regular activities, and we're going to do some group games. So you won't miss any instruction when you leave." You know, that's a teacher's thought, having to make up work. "As your parents come, you may go with them. We are a small school, and we're like a family." The children did not seem upset. They played games, and they went as the parents came for them. Some of the parents were upset, and when we saw them and were able to take them aside, I know the principal took some of them inside her office and calmed them down and before they were to meet with their children. I was calm, so my kids in my classroom were calm. It was important for me to answer their questions as they asked them, but I didn't tell them everything I knew. If they asked me something that I didn't know the answer to, I simply said, "I don't know." I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted to protect them and their childhood. And I remember never using the word terrorist that day. As the day went on, some parents did not come. There were some who lived so close to the crash site that they found it hard to get home. We were one of the few schools that was still in session. All around us, all the neighboring districts had gone home. We were still there. When our homerooms just had a few children, we put them together in one room. there seemed to be a feeling of safety in numbers. We put in a VCR tape, and I remember the title of that film. It was Free Willy. We had made a conscious decision not to have the children watch the events unfold on television. We were getting some news from adults, and were careful to be discreet around the children. One of my former students, and since it's such a small school, we know everyone. She was a fourth grader, and she was crying. I hugged her and I asked her, "What's wrong?" And she told me she was worried about her brother. Since I had both of her brothers, I asked her which one she was worried about. And she told me, and I said, "He's fine." She was okay, and she went back to watching the movie. She was the only child that I saw get visibly upset that day. In the days that followed September 11th, the children really didn't ask me a lot of questions. They came to school in the morning and discussed before the bell what they had done the night before. Some had gone to church. Some had been at the fire company with their parents, and they were helping to stock the food for the workers at the crash site. Some even said they had been on the back of a pickup truck, helping deliver sandwiches they had made at home. Others talked about a lot of people being here. They saw and waved to family members on Flight 93 on buses. I remember them talking about hands being pressed up against the windows as they went by. They saw police, FBI, and reporters. When that bell rang and the day was to start for school, I had listened to them talk, and it was ready to start a normal day. It was business as usual. We did not dwell on the crash. Rather, we tried to continue with our normal routine of learning, helping others, help them cope. But resuming our regular day and our schedule gave them stability. Soon after the crash, children signed painted plywood boards honoring the heroes. Some were in downtown Shanksville, and this particularly is a third grade class who walked down together to sign the boards. We have a lovely grove of trees below the school that we used as a garden of reflection. As families came to the site, they came to our town and some to our school. So we placed yellow ribbons around trees and gave organizations and classrooms the opportunity to put a laminated message for them to read. This particular group, I think it was a group of 4-H'ers, and they were putting up the Serenity Prayer. Messages were painted on the windows of our school, too. Most of those messages were very patriotic. Some of them were thanking the heroes of Flight 93. Children collected pennies for the fire company. We wrote letters of thanks to the firemen. We even collected money for the Afghan children, too, because that was in the news at the time. Our little school received letters and communications from the family members of Flight 93. The faculty had sent 40 hand-signed letters with all of the faculty on each letter. We didn't Xerox it. To Seven Springs, and the students had signed a big banner that was sent there. Our town had adopted those families of the heroes on that flight. The mother of the co-pilot, I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce her name correctly, Elsie Homer, she wrote a letter to the children, and we were to read it to our class, and I'll just read a little portion of what she said. She said, "I always thought that angels are in heaven, but I know now that they are small or grown up and live in Shanksville and neighboring communities. Thanks goes to each of you and to your families and teachers who so lovingly shaped your personality to be of great value to society and to our nation's future." Then we also received a letter, particularly from Jeremy Glick's sister, Jennifer. She contacted us because she wanted to create a scrapbook for Jeremy's very young child. I think that she was only months old at the time. They wanted mementos of our little school to share when she could understand. So I happened to be in the office when the principal was struggling with what to do. And she called me into her office and she asked me, she says, "Brainstorm, tell me, what can we do?" And she shared with me Jennifer's letter. Since I heard scrapbook or memory box, I was thinking automatically of a photo. And I came up with the idea of photographing the whole school in a large human thank you. It was simple, but something a child would say and understand. All of the students, teachers, cooks, janitors, principals, even parents who were visiting that day, became part of that photograph. And as I stood out there, and I remember exactly where I was standing, I was at the end of the T. Most of the young children that we're talking about today were part of the T, and maybe some of them part of the H. We had them line up last. We knew we couldn't keep them in line very long, I guess. But as I stood there, while the photo was being taken, I thought, was this really a good idea? We have all these children here, and now we have a low-flying plane making many passes, trying to take an aerial photograph. Would this make them afraid? And the answer was no. They weren't afraid. They realized what we were doing. We were saying thank you to those families. And we wanted them to know how thankful we were. So we sent this photo, not just to the families, but to all who communicated with us that year. The students even bought copies to keep as mementos themselves. That photo, along with this one, was sent to Glick's. This is my class again, and you see they're very patriotic. We made a handmade flag. I don't think you can read what it said, but part of what it said was, "Flight 93, you are heroes to me." Many drawings were received and done that year as a way of expressing how the children felt. So many of the drawings included hands, helping hands. The art teacher, along with a sculptor, designed a statue to honor the volunteers of 9/11. The statue was cast with all the handprints of the students and the teachers. It stands today in front of the school with a memorial garden. Now, I write plays every year for my class to perform, and this year was no exception. They performed them for their parents at Christmas time. And this particular year, I chose to write a play using the format and music of NBC's Today Show. The student who asked most of the questions on that day, I cast him as Matt Lahr. There happened to be a girl in my classroom who was also named Katie, so of course she got the job of Katie Couric. And later, as I sent the script home, the mother called me and she said, "How did you know?" I went to the Today Show when I was pregnant and decided to name my daughter Katie after Katie Couric. The play was about the past, present, and future Christmases, and I even interviewed Adam's dad, the real fire chief of Shanksville at that time, and I put him on VCR tape, and of course we pretended we were going to satellite and all of that stuff. I brought a copy of the play. I just have one copy. It's on that table if you want to look at it. As that first year progressed, we did and received many things. I happened to find a balloon with a note that was sent by a child 176 miles away. The balloon was promoting peace. I wrote back to this little boy, told him what we were doing, and I shared it with my administrator, and lo and behold, we ended up having our own balloon launch for peace. Many children visited the temporary memorial with their families, and we saw more people come and go in our community. Gifts and people came to our school. I have a teddy bear from Oklahoma City on that table. It was taken from the fence at Oklahoma City. There's a book also there that they sent us so that we could read it to the children. There were flowers and leis from a tape from a school in Hawaii. That school happened to be named Pearl Harbor Elementary. And there's also a little booklet there with some pictures of the kids. The teachers got real flower leis, and the kids got paper ones, but they had messages from the students, and they had made them themselves. We had heart pins with seed patches from Colorado, and I have, again, something like that over there on the table. As they were getting all these things, and this was one of the hardest questions I had to deal with that year. They asked me, why? Why are all these things coming to us? They just didn't understand. And I tried to explain that many people wanted to do something. Just like we helped with food for the workers, pennies for the fire company, this was their way of helping. Helping others makes you feel good. It was still hard for them to understand, but as children do, they accepted the gifts anyway. The people of the community had cared for those families of Flight 93, and they realized that those families had reason to be comforted because they had lost a loved one. They had communicated this to their children, and that the children were simply reflecting their parents' attitudes. I don't think they felt a need to be comforted. On the very first anniversary, children drew pictures for a wall of hope, and we had an author come to share his book with us. Drawing helped them to communicate their remembrances. There was a governor who also visited the school that day. We did not have a school in session on the first anniversary, and some of us prayed in a circle outside by the playground. In the years following, we always took time on September 11th for moments of silence at the actual crash time. And I know that probably the younger children probably didn't understand them, but they were there. We dressed in red, white, and blue, and we often had assemblies or guest speakers. As an educator, I treat that day as a part of our country's history. And I don't mean it for just to stay that way as I listen to Gordon's comments. But remember, the children I have today were born after 9/11. Many of my children weren't aware of the events on that day. Perhaps because their parents don't want to alarm them or don't know how to talk about it with them. And so I introduced that day this year, and I have in years past, as Patriot Day. It's on our calendar. That's what they have it named. And I talk about how Americans have holidays to celebrate and honor people who have served our country. And I talked about how these people who served our country were not necessarily in uniform that day. We honor people by remembering them, by wearing red, white, and blue, by flying flags, singing songs, and having services. I asked my children this year if they've been to the Flight 93 Memorial. And then usually they want to share and tell what they've seen or heard. I listen carefully to make sure they have accurate information. You'd be surprised what some of them think. I heard tell of one child who thought, and it wasn't in my classroom, who didn't want to board a plane because he didn't want to go on with any of the blind pilots, and thought that was the reason why there were crashes. So if I hear of anything like that, I correct it. If questions come, I answer them. I call the people on the plane heroes and explain any decorations that we might have and we're displaying. This year, on the 10th anniversary, the flags that are before you, every child in the elementary had their handprint on these flags. We displayed them on a chain link fence close to their playground, and there were stars of all the names of the passengers. This was a lot like the temporary memorial. And this year, at the end of the school day, we gathered both second grades up together, all 24 of us, and we played God Bless America on the bells. This year, my daughter, who's 7 years old, watched the anniversary services for Flight 93 with me. She asked me what happened, and I shared the story. She asked, "Why does God make bad people?" Her grandfather, who was a Flight 93 ambassador and also a minister, he answered, "God doesn't make bad people. Sometimes people just choose to do bad things." And as we continued to watch the service, she disappeared. I thought she wasn't interested, but she was really going to her desk to draw. She made a big heart with the words Flight 93 on it, and she placed it at the base of the TV. And then she placed some artificial flowers below it. She made a flag and placed it there with a big note that said, "Pray for the people on Flight 93, please." She was trying to understand. It's hard to believe that the children I had on that unforgettable day in 2001 are seniors. Their memories might not be as vivid as mine, but I know they remember that day. I hope they remember the strength of the American people, the love that was shown, and that helping others is the right thing to do. I'd like to close with advice that Leroy Homer's mother, in her letter sent to the children, and I quote, "Love each other and try to be playful. Do not dwell on the evil of September 11th, because we as God's people are good, caring souls. Life can be difficult, but with faith, hope, and love, we can overcome many obstacles." Thank you for having me.
I have to apologize. Been sitting here through the last couple sessions, and it's been a real memory jogger for me. And I've seen a lot of photos that I've forgotten about, and it's amazing how quickly your memory brings all of that back out again. I'd like to begin just by explaining how I ended up becoming the first field ranger at Flight 93. I think that's a good starting point, at least. On September 11th, 2001, I was actually attending undergraduate studies at a branch campus at Penn State, and learned about the attacks like I believe many Americans did through the television set. And as I was watching the coverage unfold, learned that a fourth plane had gone down near Jennerstown, Pennsylvania, which for me, being 2.5 hours away from home, was to hear that on NBC News, national news, was just incredible. And so I immediately began trying to call home, and I couldn't get through because all of the lines were busy. There was just this mass congestion trying to make any communication. And Karen mentioned my father. He is still the acting fire chief in Shanksville. I became involved with the fire service, trying to follow in Dad's footsteps, I think, is the main reason I joined when I became 16 years old. And so I had been a member of the department, was the oldest senior active firefighter with Shanksville when this had occurred, and yet I was 2.5 hours away from all of the events that were taking place. And so I immediately wanted to know what was happening, what could I do, like everybody else, and if I needed to get in my car and come home. And so days following and everything, I eventually made my way home and was a part of some of the recovery efforts out at the site on my weekends home from school. And after I finished, fast forward a little bit here, I had the whole reason for my undergraduate studies was really to become a historian. I had done work at Gettysburg National Military Park as a volunteer, and figured that was really what I wanted to do. I wanted to go work for the National Park Service. And so that was what was going on the side when these events took place in my home community. And I came home and I took a number of internships with Barbara Black, the curator at Flight 93. And at that time, she was at Somerset Historical Center, which was part of the state's Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. And I was trying to build the resume and everything. And when I came out of school, I was offered an internship to come to Flight 93. Mostly because I was known within the community and what my future ambitions were. And I was asked to come take a Student Conservation Association internship at Flight 93, which lasted about a year. And then it snowballed into a position as a park ranger. And I don't know if I knew then what all I was going to be getting into in terms of the responsibilities that were going to be put on not only the shoulders of the volunteers that were there before us, but stepping into that realm and being able to protect and care for a site as special as one that came out of the devastating events of that day. And so that's really how I became involved. Yesterday when I was driving home, I have a 20-month-old son. And I was thinking, as I was getting him out of the car last night after I picked him up from daycare, at what point I was going to be ready to share this story with him and how I was going to be able to do that. And I still don't have the answer for that. But as I was doing that, I was reminded of something that I've sort of squirreled away in my attic for the last 10 years, and Karen just spoke about it. She talked about the second graders that were writing letters to the firefighters in Shanksville. And last night I went up to my attic, and lo and behold, 10 years and 2 days to the date, this letter was written to me. It was personalized to me from none other than Mike Maringer, who was pictured up here a few minutes ago on her screen in her class. And he wrote me this. He didn't know me, just wrote this letter to me, and he said, "You save people's lives, so keep up the good work, firemen. Thanks for putting the fire out at the plane crash. You're a hero." And that's just one response that generated right out of the crash. And by all means, I don't take any stock in We all know who the true heroes that day were at our site. But there were other experiences, and I think it would be important to talk about one of the closest experiences a child's had visiting our site, and that would be the experience of Sonali Bevan, who was the daughter of Alan Anthony Bevan, who's a passenger on Flight 93, and her experience coming to the memorial for the first year anniversary. And this, if you care to read her whole story, there's much more to it. I'm just taking two little snippets out of her experiences. This comes from an April 8th, 2005 posting that appeared in Chicken Noodle Soup for the Soul, and it was written by Sonali's mother, Kimmy. When she heard Alan's plane had crashed and he was not coming home, she wailed a cry so deep and heartbreaking, a cry I pray I will never hear again from any living being. She sobbed for an hour straight, and then she looked at me in the eyes and said, "I am so sad. But I'm not the saddest girl in the world. Some children have lost their mommy and their daddy, and I still have you." Kimmy continued about their experience in Shanksville then, 1 year later. Sonali picked up some dirt in her hands, folded her hands in prayer, and began singing a beautiful hymn she learned in India the previous winter. Everyone stopped to listen to her. Then she held the dirt to her heart and threw it toward the plane. As the sun peeked momentarily through the thick cloud cover, Sonali looked up and said, "There's Daddy." She drew a heart in the gravel and asked for some flowers, which she arranged beautifully around the heart with one flower in the center for her daddy. And if you look up at the PowerPoint slide, the one in the upper left is actually what she created while she was visiting in 2002 for the memorial ceremony. These two experiences are probably the most direct and directly impacted by the events of what happened in Shanksville in 2001. And from that point, when I stepped onto the field in 2006, wearing this uniform, people automatically see the National Park Service Ranger. They come up to you and they expect, you're wearing the uniform, you're the expert, so you have the answers. And at that point, we were just getting our feet under our legs, and we were getting ready to be able to get out there and present the basic story to adults. We were just beginning to get to that point. It was challenging times because at the memorial, there was a lot of listening involved because we all had experienced the same event in a completely different way, and people wanted to share that when they came. And a lot of the people that were being left out of this conversation, this dialogue that was happening between rangers and volunteers and the visiting public, were the children, the little children that would come to the site. And so you would get to witness all sorts of behaviors when children would come to the site. And from your observations from working a shift or whether you were there for part of the day, you could take away a lot of things. I think one of the most interesting things was because of the close nature of the early temporary memorial sites that Jeff was showing you on the slides earlier this morning, was that you were close enough to hear the conversations of both the adults and the children as they were getting out of their car in the parking lot. And you could sort of deduce what kind of conversations, or think about, what had been discussed on the car ride there, or what hadn't been discussed, more importantly, what hadn't been talked about, or was there any indication of what might the visit be about, the place that they were coming to, or what it was about. And oftentimes you would hear similes. We're going to this place. It's a lot like church. This is a place like a cemetery. We want to be quiet. We want to be respectful. You need to be on your best behavior. Things like that. And for a 24-year-old with no children being put into this position, and you start to wonder, how much do you share with children? And at the time when we began giving programs to the general public when they would come to the memorial, you get finished, wrap up your program, might go 30, 35 minutes when we were giving the story to the public. And then, as if out of nowhere, the little person comes up to you and they ask, why? Why? Why did they do this? Why did they intentionally fly these planes into buildings? And you wonder how much their parents have shared with them, if they've been prepared at all, because if you know the demographics in those days, a lot of people didn't even, once the signage went up and they were traveling down the Route 30 corridor, they didn't realize they were so close. They saw the signs. This was a side trip. We didn't really quite plan for it, but we have to see it while we're here. We shoot into the memorial, and there's no preparation at all. And now you're there in the uniform, and you're the expert, and tell my daughter about this story. And like I said, we were just getting to learn the intricate details of what these people had done on the plane, the phone calls that they had placed, and what they had accomplished in such little time. And we were beginning to actually be able to put that into words for adults. Where do I begin with such a young child? How much do I tell them? How much don't I tell them? And in each circumstance, I can't ever remember repeating myself once. I can't remember doing the same type of an activity or answering the same question the same way, because it was a learning process the whole way through, because we really were ill-prepared. We were, it was really making it up on the fly. And Jeff's absolutely right. We're lifting a little bit of the curtain back today. We really weren't prepared for how to deal with that audience. And so some of the questions, back up 1 minute here. The other photo that you see on this slide shows a little toy car. And I chose this photo specifically because there was a lot of confusion with the children that weren't prepared for the space that they were coming into. And so their parents are so caught up in this story because they've lived it, they've experienced it. A lot of emotions are being expressed at the memorial. And so the parents are sort of off. They're reading what there is to read. They're looking at what there is. They've sort of already forgotten, I have, little Johnny, little Susie here with me. And before they know it, they're over here playing with the cars, and then I hear scolding, put that down. That's not a toy. It is a toy. Well, it's somebody left that here out of respect for, and then that dialogue begins and the explanation begins. But it's almost, and not always, and in many cases not always, but at times it was almost an afterthought that, because the emotions were so raw in those early years. And so one story I can think of right off the top of my head was the children playing at the fence. Picked up some of the items that were there. I don't exactly know what at the time. And the parents were sort of, don't play with that. And then they sort of had traipsed off over to the other corner of the memorial and were going about what they were looking at. And I was in this place of, how do I engage, and do I engage? Are the parents going to have a problem with that? And now, looking back as a parent, I question that same approach. Would I want somebody like that coming up to my son and sharing that kind of information? I would probably look at them to be the expert, to be able to share with them. And so I engaged that day. And the only thing I knew how to do with them was get out the picture book that had the faces of all of the people that were on the plane. And we went over and we sat on the benches. There weren't a lot of people there. The parents continued to look around. We sat there and we picked through the photos, and I told them a little bit about each of these people and who they were, as why they would have been on the plane that day, and who they really were. A little bit about their bios, what they could take away. And the questions were geared around, well, why is there a dog? Why did somebody let a silhouette of a dog over here? And you'd explain to them, well, one of the passengers on the flight absolutely loved his dog. Do you have a dog too? Yeah, we have a cat. Well, we don't have a dog. We have a cat. Okay. Well, these people, they're just like you and me. And they had pets. They had brothers and sisters too. And just like it's been mentioned prior here, a lot of the perception skills, just we don't give them enough credit to what they're seeing and what they're feeling. And I think that's illustrated in another story that was shared with me by one of our volunteers. A grandmother wrote to us in 2002, and she said, while visiting my grandson, we went to see the site, the 9/11 site where the plane went down in Shanksville. And I did not tell my grandson why we were there. He was almost 4 years old at this time. And I didn't want him to be afraid of flying. So we got there, and when we came upon, there were some angels. Karen, some of the angels were up here earlier. He looked at them and he said, "Oh, Grandma, I think we need to sit down a minute here." Which he did, and she proceeded to tell us that he sat there for about 10 minutes on the ground. And it was as if he knew this was a time and place for thought and prayer. The general atmosphere at the memorial is one wide-ranging emotions. People come there, they're angry. The adults have just as many questions sometimes as the children do. And so in those years, we had to learn to answer questions like, where is the plane? It's one of the biggest expectations when the children come. This is the site of a plane crash, they've been told. But they want to see the tangible evidence. They're expecting to see the Boeing 757. And it's not here. And that's, I think, a really hard thing for young children to wrap their head around. Where are all the people that died? Were there kids on that plane? One of the photos that we used to show in one of the notebooks had a photo of one of the passengers' daughters. You talked about Emmy when she was a baby, and Jeremy Glick, one of the passengers on the plane, is one of the photos that you often see of him is kissing his little girl. And so children would right away want to know, were there children on the plane? Did it hurt? Where's the hole in the ground? Who did this? Why? And is it going to happen again? This year has been a whirlwind. I think Jeff will back me up on that, and anybody, Barbara and the rest of the staff. And in preparation to get ready for the 10th anniversary, we intentionally decided we needed to start looking at this audience. We needed to start coming up with resources, and we need to be better prepared. The next generation of rangers that's coming on board they should be able to learn from the experiences of the first people that were on the ground there, but they need to have more than that. And I'm so glad that this forum's taking place today, because it's an opportunity for us to all put our heads together and be able to hopefully pull together more resources in order to prepare the next generation of visitors. And as Gordy mentioned in his remarks earlier, we're already crossing the bridge to where the new generation is the visitor. No longer can I say to a young group of students that are visiting the memorial, September 11th. Do you remember September 11th? Is it a figment of your imagination back there? I remember when I was in second grade and we were going to war and the Gulf War was taking place. And I have those vivid memories, or those really distant memories of that happening when I was in school. And yet, we're crossing the bridge where you can't even say the event by date, and it has that trigger impact like it used to 5 or 6 years ago. And so we've been trying to grapple with the challenges. We, through the years, developed a junior ranger program, and one of the things that I think we hope to take away from all of this is an activities booklet that when children are coming there, the best thing that they can do is experience the site, not by themselves, but with somebody that they're visiting with, and make it more of a group experience. I wanted to conclude with just a remark that Fred Rogers, actually not a remark, but something he wrote to adults. There will probably be many times throughout the lives that children will feel the world is turned upside down. What can always help them feel more secure, though, is knowing that love can hold many feelings, including sadness, and that they can count on the people they love to be with them until their world seems right side up again. I expect my son to be able to count on me, to be able to share the story of what happened that day. But in a greater sense, I charge the agency that I work for and I'm representing today to be able to be counted on by the many visitors that are coming there, to be able to meet not just the adult audiences, but the children that are visiting the site as well. And that's the ongoing challenge that we meet day to day and that we're striving to fulfill.
I know what it feels like to feel like you're following an amazing act. I thank you for being there for the children, both of you, to find a way to hold on to what's going on with you and try to figure out how to be supportive to the kids. What a hard thing and an important thing. I'm trying to think of the best way to use the time. There's so many thoughts running through my head as I've been listening to the stories, and I'm sure that's true for you as well. So what I'll try to do is touch on a few points that I was thinking of and then open it up to some questions, because I believe that most importantly is the dialogue and the thinking together about these very, very tough issues. Some of your pictures. Okay. As we think together about the impact of tragedy in the lives of young children, how do they take in these overwhelming events? What is their experience from their point of view? And how do we as adults, as caring adults, walk with them and support them through these very, very difficult times. Now, we've been talking about, in some ways, a shared experience. And many children who, thinking of in your classroom, were in some ways part of the same shared experience. And what I wanted to kind of switch the focus on a little bit is the story of the one, and the story of the children who very personally experience the death of a family member, of someone who is very, very significant in their life. Maybe because of 9/11, maybe because of a long illness or a car crash, because from their point of view, in some ways, and this is a quote from a young man who came to the caring place. He said, "When my dad died, it was like someone dropped a nuclear bomb on my life." And so these are individual 9/11s for children. Roberta did a beautiful job talking about developmental issues and grief, so I don't want to belabor the point, but I will tell you that what the children have taught me is that when someone you love very much dies, someone you love very much, when they die, it is a physical, emotional, spiritual kick in the gut. I mean, we all know this if we've had our own losses. It touches every single part of our being, and that is true for children as well. But you know, they're little bodies, they're developing minds, and it can be so overwhelming. Steve, who is in the audience here, who'd be so lucky to listen to him, he taught me so much. And what he said to me was, imagine for us, if someone we love dies, it's like a truck is circling us, and they open the back, and all the bricks just fall down on top of us. But for children, it's like a brick is being tossed one by one by one, because it's just too big to take it all in. And what I would like you to keep in mind is that don't be fooled, that children are grieving, but they grieve differently than we do. The other point I wanted to make out make is that I've heard this referred to from many of you is, in being here today, you know, grief works on not a staircase. Grief isn't something that you kind of go through this feeling and then this feeling and then this feeling and phew, got that out of the way. We come upon times of our life when it just comes flooding back again for lots of reasons. It can be a reason we choose. We can choose to visit the memorial. We can choose to pull up some photographs and allow the feelings. And sometimes it comes at us from left field. And I think for me visiting the memorial myself, that came at me from left field. I didn't realize the amount of emotions I would feel being there. And that can happen for children as well, and will happen for children for the very fact that as they grow, they will revisit their losses over and over again, and new feelings will come up and be experienced and processed. So I want you to think about this idea of a spiral. It is very fitting. I addressed a little bit about this. I think what's so difficult for kids is with all these feelings, we as adults, we have words that we can put. We have coping abilities. But young children, where does it all go? And so you may often see grief looking like a child who can't sit still, a child who does not want to sleep in his own bed at night, a child whose stomach hurts. And so the feelings can sometimes be seen in our physical being, in our behaviors when we're children. And this last one I put on thinking about it last night, and I've heard it kind of validated listening to many of you speak today. The impact of death on children is tremendously affected by who's with them when the tragedy happens. So our ability to be present, to be available, to be safe, will make a tremendous difference in how children are able to feel safe and take that in as they can and not be flooded. Sometimes that's just not possible. Sometimes we simply are overwhelmed and we're human. One of the things I learned working at the Caring Place is one of the most significant experiences of grief is anxiety. I always thought it was anger or sadness. But for young children, don't overlook anxiety because, you know, if I'm 4 or 7 and the person who I build my life around, a parent, a big brother, a grandparent who cares for me, if that person dies, all bets are off. The world is not predictable. Things don't go as it seems. And so for children, they become very anxious. If this can happen to someone I love, can it happen again? And then that really frightening feeling of being abandoned and being left alone. And I will say that as I've understood children, these feelings are even more magnified and get kind of up to the surface during certain times. Separations are so tough for grieving children. Transitions, nighttime, and when there are changes in routine. And you'll see this as educators and people in the schools. Sometimes it's very hard for a grieving child to leave for school in the morning knowing that they're going to be leaving a parent behind. Because the last time they turned around and weren't paying attention, something terrible happened. And I physically want to be holding on to my adult so that I can be sure they're okay. So just be mindful of what it means for a child to even have separations, to fall asleep at night, you know, and let go of the day, what's going to happen at night. These can be very difficult times for kids, and they need our extra support and understanding. Realize that when children experience the death of a family member, they lose so much. And I'm so appreciative to hear the story about your nieces because they say what I hear kids say. Oh my gosh, not only did I lose my mom or my dad, but I lost who they were going to be to me as I grew up. And they will think ahead. And they think about the future losses. They have a very different family after a death. There's a person that's not sitting at that table. Maybe their surviving caregiver or their surviving siblings in their own grief are just very different people. Routines are different. And I will also say this because you are educators, and if I could bring one thing to you, it's tough for elementary school age kids who go to school after a family member has died. They really stick out. And I know that in the effort to try to keep this from happening to me, you know, if I'm 8 or 9 years old and I want to kind of distance myself from a student, a peer who's grieving, I want to kind of do something to make me not like them, not the same as them, different. And we've heard stories of kids forming clubs. You know, one was called the Dad's Club, and you had to have a dad in order to belong to it. So it's developmentally appropriate for kids to find ways of feeling safe and distance themselves from scary things. But for the grieving child, that can be really, really tough. So what do we do? I know the panel coming up is going to do some wonderful work in terms of, you know, how do we support these children? But what I wanted to do was give you a little bit of a glimpse into what they work on so hard to do, to manage, to make sense of. And these are children that are doing all kinds of work with a tool belt that doesn't have all the tools in it. So if you look at it, the work of grief is about learning how to tell your own story. We've been talking a lot about stories today. How do you help a child who has gone through something so big and so life-changing and so difficult? How do you help them create their own story that is not just about what did happen, but that is now the story of their life? They don't have all the words. They don't have all the words for the feelings. What does it mean to be dead anyway? And I heard some of you struggling with that. I still struggle with that. Children under the age of 7 don't know what it means. I mean, what do you have to know? You have to know that someone is not going to be there forever. Well, that's a long time. When I was 5, you know how long I could wait? I think Christmas. And so what you will have happen is Christmas time will come, and a child who will use the words, I know my dad has died, I know my sister has died. Christmas time becomes a spiral because, oh my gosh, I thought they would be back for Christmas. So to be so respectful of the hard work they're doing, and yet they do it. So what I'd like to do, just for a couple of slides here, is let the children teach you, as they have taught me, their stories. This is a young lady who painted this picture. It's entitled My Mommy. That's her story. This is the person in her family who died. You can tell a little bit about what this mom looked like. She had wonderful red hair. And what's interesting to me is this is a mom who died of breast cancer. And I wonder, there's a lot of detail in that area of this body. I wonder if the child is trying to make sense of that. Here's a young man who's trying to put his story to words. She had a heart cancer, and they cut part of her heart off. You know, it's so hard to understand. So what does death mean, and what in the world goes wrong with a body? Part of your story is the funeral. Kids will struggle to put feelings to what's happened. Here's a 5-year-old boy who said, there are 2 hearts on this page. The heart in the middle is for my grandfather, because when he died, I was so sad. And the heart on the right is for my father, because when he died, my heart broke in 2. The nuance of difference of feeling as expressed through their art. This is pretty self-explanatory, but I will tell you, this young man looking at the outside, a very quiet, well-behaved young man. So he's got a lot going on. Another project, just that sense of how do you put words to feelings. Hungry for answers. You see ants crawling on your leg. Do you ever feel that way? What's the word? Antsy, I guess? Ugh. Sometimes you just can't even stay in your own skin. That's a feeling of grief. This slide is because I want you to be mindful of that spiral nature, that a lot of this work will come round and round as children get older, as they understand more, as they begin to get words for their feelings. And so this is something we support children forever. Teachers who know to tell the next year teacher that there is a child who has had a death in their family are very wise, because this is something that will be carried through a child's life. Allowing children to remember the person. I love that thank you sign, because you know what I think about when I see that? We continue to talk to the people. We're thanking them. And so how do you let children know it's okay to maintain the relationship? It's okay to continue talking to the person. They still are present, maybe not in the day-to-day, but they can be present in our hearts. And the last thing I will say is, in all of this work, and I see some very poignant faces here, honor your own loss experiences as you work with children. We need to honor what we've been through and our experiences and what we've experienced as very young children as we try to think of how to help the children who are in our care. The last slides are a young man who came to the caring place whose dad did die in 9/11, and it's just, I think his story is worth sharing. There are 3 pictures, and what you'll notice over time is the emergence of helpers gets more striking. So this was what he did almost the very first day he came. Here come the fire trucks. And now there's just water and police, fire trucks, and I think this is a young man who has a very, very difficult story, but he's trying to make sense of it, and he's trying to find really the hope. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you so much, Karen and Adam, for your stories. I think they were very powerful, and we appreciate your sharing. We had wanted to allow some time for questions, but I think that I'm going to ask that we continue this dialogue over lunch. Talk with the people that you're having lunch with. If you have questions, feel free to speak with any of our panelists individually. But we do want to open a dialogue. And so, Ginny? Sure, and we can, if there are questions that you would like to bring up after lunch, we'll take a few minutes to do them then. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Roberta and Karen, Adam, Andrea. Roberta, I'm so pleased that you are teaching the next generation of teachers, because it's very obvious that you are the right person to be doing that. Karen and Adam, I've watched both of you grow up in Shanksville. I'm so proud of both of you, and I'm proud to say that my sons went to Shanksville as well, and we have a great legacy there. And Andrea, I've heard so many wonderful things of the caring place, and it's very evident today that you truly are a caring place and a wonderful place for children of grief to go. So I thank you all. Very good job. Very good job. I'm truly honored to introduce to you to our next host. I don't want to call him a guest. He is our guest, but he is a host. This gentleman is a host today, along with Brother Norman, who was here earlier, and we are so grateful to both of you for welcoming us to your beautiful campus. And I have to say, this is kind of surreal. How does a little gal from Somerset County suddenly be introducing the Archabbot, the 11th Archabbot of St. Vincent? It's incredible. Archabbot Douglas Nowicki is the 11th Archabbot of St. Vincent Archabbey and Chancellor of St. Vincent College and Seminary, and the Major Superior of the Benedictines at the Priory and Benedictine Military School in Savannah, Georgia, and the Benedictine Priories in Brazil and Taiwan. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy from St. Vincent College, a Master of Divinity from St. Vincent Seminary, and a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Tennessee. Prior to his election as Archabbot, Archabbot Douglas served for 5 years as Secretary for Education of the Diocese of Pittsburgh. At St. Vincent College, he served as chair of the Department of Psychology and Associate Academic Dean. He was also a member of the staff in the Behavioral Science Department at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. The Archabbot has also served as a psychological consultant to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood for a number of years. And there is so much more on the website about him. This man is just incredible. And we're very honored, Archabbot Douglas, to have you with us today.
I just know how deeply moved Fred would be, and pleased that he would be, that this center, which is committed to carrying on his legacy, is being able to host such a wonderful setting, and people who are dedicated to working with children in the way that you are. So on behalf of the entire Fred Rogers Center here at St. Vincent, I extend a warm welcome to you. I had the opportunity to know Fred Rogers for 45 years, going back into 1967 when I was a junior monk here, and had the pleasure to work with him over the years. I did do work in child psychology. In case any of you are interested in smiling and laughing in infants, I have a 300-page dissertation that no one has read since 1977 when it was completed. Anyhow, all of that really was the foundation for my work here with Fred Rogers. I do want to just say a few words about Fred. I think that the theme of your conference today, working with children and in the context of the challenges that they face with loss, would be something that was certainly very close to his own heart. I don't know if any of you recall that anytime there was a national tragedy in this nation, it was always Fred Rogers that the media turned to speak to children and to families, whether it was the death of John Kennedy or Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King, the Challenger explosion, and 9/11 itself. The media always looked to Fred Rogers to be able to comfort children and to be able to speak the words that would bring comfort. And I think he was able to speak the words of comfort because he himself was so deeply imbued with that love and goodness that he always felt was rooted in the eternal. And Fred was a believer, and I think his faith was an important part of what he communicated. And in his early years, his work with children's television was seen as his ministry. I can recall back in 1979, we hosted the 25th anniversary of Fred's work in children's television here at St. Vincent College. Eric Erickson was the keynote speaker on that occasion, and Mr. Erickson himself paid great tribute to the wonderful contribution that Fred Rogers made to what he referred to as a wasteland of children's television. I think all of us know that the horrible condition of children's television that has existed for so many years, but Fred, in a way, was an oasis of hope in the midst of all that. Many have referred to him as the conscience of children's television. He was able to really provide the best. I can recall Les Brown, who was a critic for the New York Times, who joined us in 1979 for that, recalled that in a visit to a cemetery outside of London a few years previous, he had come upon an epitaph on a tombstone that said he did the best possible things in the worst possible times, and he said that certainly applied to Fred Rogers. When children's television was at its worst, he did his best to respond to the needs and to really speak to the hearts of children. And Fred's motto was, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And I think his great challenge and task was to facilitate children in speaking about those things that were troublesome to them or whatever was burdening their hearts. The challenge for all of you, of course, is in your daily contact with children is to enable them to have hope. We know that there are many challenges that we all face in this life, and as mentioned by our presenters this morning, that the burdens that children bear in their own lives at times can be a burden in a very heavy way for them that at times can manifest itself in their behavior in so many different ways. Fred had great respect for teachers and those who are really on the front line in working with children, and I know his deep respect and affection for the work that you do would be, he would be honored again to know that this center is hosting such a wonderful event today because of the great respect and deep love that he had for teachers and respect for the work that you do with children on a daily basis. So on behalf of the legacy of Fred Rogers and Fred Rogers himself, I extend gratitude to you. A number of years ago, for the 150th anniversary of St. Vincent, actually, Fred wrote a little piece for our brochure, and I just wanted to share just a few lines with you today because I think it reflects, again, the kind of spirit that Fred embodied. Whether we talk about it or not, we human beings long to know that we are lovable, that we have value, that what we most deeply hope for is real. We want to be sure that the madness of violence, greed, hatred, even death itself is not the final word of our existence. We long to know that the final word is love. God gives us that word for all of us who will receive it. He gives it through lasting friendships, through the trust of children, through the beauty and power of art and science, through forgiveness, through comfort and sorrow, through hospitality to a neighbor. Your presence here today, I think, reflects that kind of love, that kind of goodness, which I know all of us hope and pray for will touch and make a difference in the lives of children, as each one of you do. So, again, my thanks to you for being here today and for sharing in this day, and again for the many blessings that you bring to all of those children who are entrusted to your care on a daily basis. Thank you.